Hi, Jim Roddy here from the RSPA with some big news before we start today's episode. Registration is now open for Retail Now 2021, the Retail IT Channel's #1 trade show, education conference, and networking event. Join RSPA and Retail IT Channel leaders live and in person July 25th through 27th at the Gaylord Opryland in Nashville. Retail Now will have everything you've come to expect from the RSPA, plus several new features. Also, the RSPA is working closely with the Gaylord and will follow CDC and local guidelines and recommendations to ensure our priority remains the health and safety of attendees. For all the details, visit the Retail Now 2021 website at gorspa.org/retailnow. Hope to see you there, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to a very special episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solutions Providers Association. I'm Jim Roddy, back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, our goal is to accelerate the success of today's and tomorrow's leaders in the retail IT industry. And for this episode, we're going to accomplish that through a highly popular format we call Battle of the Channel Stars. Our discussion today will be divided into 4 segments with separate but related topics. Our 2 guests will share their perspective on each topic, and then I'll join in on the discussion. And here's where it gets fun. At the end of each segment, I get to award a point to who I believe makes the best case, stated their points most clearly, shared the most compelling anecdotes, things like that. And so the rules are kind of loose, and so I get to be the judge and jury deciding that. And we're going to keep track of the points using the scoreboard. Those watching on our YouTube channel can see behind me the incredible state-of-the-art scoreboard that we have. It's got AI, IoT, LED, solar powered. I mean, it's just the most amazing scoreboard. If you're not watching this on YouTube, you really want to make sure that you jump to see it. I got a lot of questions after the first episode of this. People said, is that thing street legal? And the answer is, we think so. It's just an absolutely fantastic scoreboard. We'll be tracking and keeping track of all the points today. All right, at the end of the episode, whoever earns the most points is declared that episode's gold medalist, while the other participant is a silver medalist. Now, you might say we're going to have a winner and a loser, but to me, there are no losers in the RSPA. We're going to have a gold medalist, we're going to have a silver medalist. And so if after 4 segments, the score is tied, we're going to go into overtime with a bonus question to determine who gets gold and who gets silver. So that's how we play Battle of the Channel Stars. We'll have a meaningful conversation in a fun framework. All right, let's meet our 2 contestants. First, Jules Curs is the Director of Operations at Qlaborate, a restaurant VAR with headquarters in both Houston and St. Louis. Jules joined Qlaborate in 2017 and has worked on our channel for a total of 16 years. Jules has been active in the RSPA, including serving as a panelist at Retail Now 2019 for the RSPA Women in Retail Community Event, Generational Perspectives from a Female Workforce. Jules, great to have you here today.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, pleasure to have you here. And you're dialing in from Missouri, is that correct?
Yes, Columbia, Missouri.
Beautiful. Go Tigers. Wonderful. Our second guest / contestant is Sean Buckley. Sean joined Shopify 1 year ago today as the Retail Partnerships Lead. Prior to that, for 5 years, he worked for Retail ISV Vend as their Director of Partner Management for the Americas. Now, this isn't the first time Sean and I have collaborated on a podcast. Sean was a regular guest on my Vant of WorldPay pod when we hosted recommended read book review episodes. Sean, it is great to be working with you again. I hope you still remember those book reviews fondly.
I do, and I learned a lot from them, and it's good to see you again, Jim, and nice to meet you, Jules.
Hello.
Yeah, glad we could get everybody together, and Sean is dialing in today from Toronto, where he's been locked down for about a year since we had the RSPA Canadian Community event in there, and you and I hung out at Tim Hortons for a bit. So, all right, before we begin the battle, I'm hoping that our guests can each give about 30 seconds on where their company fits in the channel so folks know where they're coming from. So, Jules, first tell us a little bit about Qlaborate.
Well, Qlaborate has been around technically since 1953. Its most recent invention is the name Qlaborate, which we designed in 2018. We are a retail and hospitality VAR in the channel, and we provide a total solution package from point of sale, phones, internet, camera systems, and our goals and our mission, and really our company culture is extremely focused on the idea that off the shelf and customization is not always the best fit for everyone. And we try to highly engage with our customers and serve them in a way that's very creative and flexible.
Got it. Great. And the prior name was like Houston Point of Sale or something like that. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. When we moved into that St. Louis market, the word Houston didn't really serve us much. And so for those of them who are familiar with our company, the last name of our owner is Kamsia, which begins with a Q. And the idea that we would collaborate with our customers was a big part of choosing that name and using his initial for it.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, just like, Houston wouldn't work in St. Louis. St. Louis wouldn't exactly work in Houston. Marketing 101 right there. All right, Sean, so I'm guessing everyone listening knows Shopify, but they might not know their channel play. I guess, can you share some details about that?
Yeah, so Shopify commerce platform for merchants, and I work in the retail practice at Shopify. So retail for us specifically is our focus on bricks and mortar operations and in-person selling. So yeah, we have a healthy audience or a healthy group of agency partners that are store builders for e-commerce. We've recently in the last year started engaging with that group to provide omni-channel solutions to their merchants, so point of sale as well as online. Also working with solutions providers that are bricks and mortar first focused, and with our point of sale as well as our omni-channel offering. We have hardware partners in the space for the hardware aspect of things, and then we have a healthy ecosystem of integrated apps, other ISVs, and technology partners as well.
Great, fabulous. Thank you for that, both of you, and thanks both for being RSPA members. And before we get going, we did, before we hit record on this, go through a rigorous stretching session, so neither Jules or Sean would pull a muscle during the battle today. So we're going to be safe about this today. So, all right, so the focus for today's Battle of the Channel Stars is accountability. And so in the first episode, for those who remember, we had a really great video that we kind of broke down and had our guests pull some pieces from that and share their opinions. So I wanted to base our discussion today on a great video, great article about accountability, but honestly, I couldn't find one. Like, they were either too broad or too shallow or just too obvious. Like, so many are like, well, who wouldn't behave that way? So let's, over the next 45 minutes or so, let's create a great podcast and video about accountability. And to up the stakes for Sean and Jules, as we mentioned, Sean's in Toronto, Jules is from Missouri, so this is USA versus Canada, to pit the two countries against one another. And if somebody's thinking, Jim, that's not fair, you're an American, you're going to lead towards Jules, I say to you, I'm in Erie, Pennsylvania, that's pretty close to the US-Canada border, and Erie has a team in the Ontario Hockey League, so I kind of consider myself an unofficial dual citizen of both countries. So, all right, well, let's start the battle with our first question here. So this is for the first point. So talking about accountability, for many people in their minds, accountability equals blaming others. And so that shouldn't be the case, but unfortunately, that's what a lot of people think. So, they say one person screws up or one group makes a mistake and everybody's pointing fingers at them. So Jules, I'm hoping we can start with you. Can you talk about the importance of starting the quest for organizational accountability with a candid self-assessment of yourself, right? Before you can hold other people accountable, you have to admit where you've fallen short, where you're not currently strong, and then embrace self-improvement. So how important is self-accountability to self-improvement?
One of the key tenets to accountability is, can I change what I'm trying to change? And it's not just a perspective of the thing you're trying to change, can it be changed, but can I, Jules, change it? And the ability to answer that question is purely in the idea of looking at yourself, looking at your strengths, and deciding how you can use those to kind of maximize your effort, but then also using those to support the areas of your weakness. And that means knowing those weaknesses. And so when we look at this, it's simple things from understanding whether or not somebody's a morning person or an afternoon person. That's not even a strength versus weakness. It's just knowing which that is, to know when they will be best for which task. And so I think that self-awareness can lead you then to, what is the best way I can lead my team? And what is the best thing that my team needs from me? Like, individually, who are they? And if they can come to me and give me their perspective of that, that oftentimes shares with me things that I didn't even realize about them. And so I think that that's one of the biggest part of it, is understanding everybody's strengths, weakness, and just characteristic traits.
Interesting. Got it. Thank you. Sean, what's your take on this question?
Yeah, so I looked at it from the leadership lens as well. And the idea of being able to take responsibility for your own behavior and even your own like well-being as an extension of that. There's many cases where something might go wrong and you need to look for accountability. And if you don't look inwards on yourself and don't take that responsibility as a lead, it's more often than not likely that the rest of your team will see that. And they'll be like, well, you are partially responsible. You have to own that. And if you don't start with yourself, then you're not really commanding an honest kind of playing field with your team if you're trying to hold them accountable. So if there's shared accountability, if there's something that you're trying to coach into your team from that perspective, if you're trying to give them feedback, will they really apply it if you're not doing it and starting with yourself? Probably not. And so self-accountability plays a crucial role there, especially from like a leadership perspective in my eyes. And if you start with yourself and you look at where you made your own errors and mistakes and you can self-correct that, then you can also lead through example. So no better way to lead than by example, and starting with yourself and learning where you can look at those errors and honestly admitting it to your team, using yourself as that example, I think is an excellent like transition into self-improvement and improvement for your team, and actually being able to have them receive the information and the coaching that you might be providing because you're doing it honestly with yourself.
Got it. Starting there. Yeah, my college basketball coach used to say, point the thumb, right? Point it at yourself, not the finger at somebody else. That's kind of where it all starts. And so I guess before I'm going to ask you guys a follow-up in terms of an example of maybe a time where you did self-reflect or hold yourself accountable and how it impacted you and your team. But I guess I'll throw myself on the mercy of the court first and share a story of mine. When I was a young manager, I had to manage two groups of writers, editors. This is back in the days at Jameson Publishing, Business Solutions magazine. So one group sat in one office and one group was like down the hallway around. So they really didn't engage with each other much. One group was not performing very well. The other group was. So I would go to the group of high performers to complain about the group of low performers because they were frustrating me. Like naturally, I would just get frustrated. But I'm sure everybody listening to this is like, that is not a good idea. And so one time at an annual review of one of the individuals in the high performing group, I said, let's talk about areas I can improve. And she said, I can't trust you. And I was like, what? Like I almost thought to myself, look at this face, right? The boy next door. How can you not? How can you not trust me? But I said, like, well, why do you say that? Like, I'm a trustworthy guy. And she said, well, you talk about them behind their backs. You probably talk about me behind my back. And I was like, no, I don't do that. And she said, well, do they know you're talking behind their back? And I was like, oh, what could I say? And so the way that I reacted to that was, I realized the way that I was going to be able to corral this was I needed an audience. And so if the audience wasn't going to let me complain to them, then I should put them all on notice. So I brought both groups together and told the one group, here's what I've been doing. I apologize for that. That's poor behavior. And so if you guys ever catch me doing this, you help me knock it off. I'm going to commit to not do it again, but you guys can help me in this. So it was like just kind of throwing it all on the table. And I thought people would, get really angry at me, but people were appreciative to a degree, right? They were like, thank you. It's good to know you've been doing this. And it helped foster a more positive conversation where I could have a one-on-one and help that other person instead of there was no help, it was helping me vent and blow off steam, but that's wasn't helping us get closer to the outcome. So I guess I wanted to throw that ugly failure of an example on there and see if either one of you had an example you might want to share.
I'll share. My self-awareness is about overthinking. I am 100% person when I look at projects that I don't like to release something unless I know it's absolutely perfect. And a lot of times that means I'm the obstacle to things moving forward in the fastest way possible. And so I've had to learn to be 80%. When I'm trying to design what we're doing, what project we're doing, what automation we're putting into place, all the way to the actual implementation of it. I'll get into something very specifically right now we're trying to redo our template of how we do projects in our CRM. And I keep thinking about all the possibilities that our CRM can do, like everything it could do to make this go automation, to automate it or just to go smoothly. And I can't focus on just releasing a 80% version that's usable tomorrow instead of a 110% usable version in a month. So that's where a lot of times what we're trying to change, the measures we're trying to improve, can get, I guess, Suez Canal stuck with me in the middle of it, to use a very pertinent reference. I am that ship sometimes.
All right,
So,
admitting
yeah.
you're the evergreen boat in the Suez Canal is a good step. I was going to say, for people who are listening to this later in 2021, they can know when we're recording this without looking it up. So, Sean, any stories to tell about self-accountability before I award the point?
Yeah, we have employee feedback surveys for their leads and for their leaders, and it's always a fun time as a lead to take that, unpack it, and then present yourself back to the team with that feedback. And so for me, I operate pretty transparently. I try to operate as transparent as possible. And sometimes I'm very curious, and I can get curious in different ways that the market might play out one way or another as we ideate, and that can create uncertainty within the team. That was feedback that I received. And some people don't like that type of working environment. Some people thrive in it, but not level setting ahead of time with the team, and having them understand that that's the process with which I work and that's why I'm sharing information, created a bit of uncertainty there. And so I actually looked inside the organization. How can I help correct that? What are the things you can do? And kind of like what you said in your assessment, Jim, the comment back to me was like, commit to always get better. And then there were some bullets underneath of that, but the essential thing is I understand where the gap is with how I'm working with you. I am going to commit to get better in how I communicate uncertainty to you. And that was the scenario that pops up for me because it was a big impactful moment for me, a good learning.
Great, fabulous. Yeah, you both gave wonderful answers. I'd love to give you both points, but I can say back in my days at Jameson Publishing, I would do that. Like we had a writer critique meeting where we would vote on things. I'd be like, I think both of you did great. And people are like, no, you've got to make a call. You cannot cut the baby in half. So Jules, I'm going to give you the point on this. I really liked how you said starting off with this, starting with, hey, can I change, right? Like immediately see your role in the problem and the potential solution. So again, I got to award a point to somebody. And so we've adjusted the high-tech scoreboard using the technology here to do that. All right, so Sean, this is your chance to get a point back. And so the second topic is the number one reason the tasks aren't completed or goals aren't achieved isn't like somebody chose or there was incompetence or something like that. It's just poor time management. All right, things just get away from people and they don't get to the big things. So can you talk about the importance of you as a leader or just as a good teammate focusing on the biggest opportunities and helping your team to focus on those as well? Like how critical is it for you or everyone in the organization to keep asking themselves, is this the most important thing I could be working on right now, and holding others accountable to those priorities? So Sean, you can go first.
Yeah, super critical. I was actually in a meeting earlier this week, and one of the senior leads in the meeting reminded us not to try and do too much in the project because if it gets too big, we might fail to ship anything of impact there. And so for us and for my team, we look at what is the impact of the work that we're doing and the time blocks that we're doing it. Is it high impact? There's always work for us to do. We can always create projects. There's so much work for us to be able to find and to be able to keep us busy. But busy work isn't necessarily impactful work. So we can have project A, we can have project B. Both of them can create a big time suck for us and even scope creep along that time. But maybe if we spend 100% of our time on project C is what we should be focusing on because that has the majority impact for what our big rocks are, our North Star is, our short-term KPIs, or even maybe qualitative impact that we don't necessarily measure. So we're always looking back towards that concept of impact and how our time blocks are used to move it forward.
And you mentioned
and
rocks.
then
Can you define? Oh, can you define for our audience rocks? What you mean by those?
Like a big rock. That's something that's a big mover for maybe our business unit or the organization as a whole. So something that we would set that is not an easy task to achieve, something that might require multiple projects, multiple vectors of work to help move it. But something that if we do move has a very large impact, especially in whatever time frame we're working within. So usually a big rock might be an H1 or a full year type of thing. And that's where working towards projects that have impact and time management that has impact towards moving that is valuable for us.
Super, thank you. All right, Jules, your turn.
So prioritization is the key word for us this year at Qlaborate. Like, just honestly, we, over the course of COVID, had the opportunity to, again, work on the automation of our SLAs. And so we talk about priority, we talk about impact and urgency in regards to granular things like just a particular service ticket, but then also from a large perspective about how we allocate our resources on a daily basis, whether that be labor or it be you know, simple things like our fleet vehicles. And so as we look at these different pieces, we understand that the prioritization needle is constantly changing, or even that point of prioritization is a constant movement. In any given moment, something could pop up because we are a customer service company for clients who are open all day, every day. We understand that something could shift us literally in the middle of one of our work days. And it could be something that shifts everything across the entire team, or it could be something that just shifts it for one person. So those prioritizations are really, really important to maintain so that you care for the people that you know, are your clients. But the other piece of that is also understanding that blocking out chunks of time are really, really helpful, and respecting those chunks of time. If we have something where we're asking a employee to get better educated about a new product, we want to make sure that we block out that time, and that time does have priority, and that we're not abusing that and we're not disrespecting it. But at the same time, also understanding that certainly if we have a client who recent Texas weather, you know, has really done some numbers on things. If we have a client that goes down, that becomes a priority. So the balance of those two things are extremely important, and there's a certain level of respect that comes with each of them.
Got it. Good points for both of you. It's funny, Sean mentioned rocks, Jules mentioned blocks, right, about blocking out time, and both of those are super effective. One tactic I'd like to share with our listeners that I've seen is, so there are different meetings, you know, that you have in order to sync up and make sure everybody's on the same page, and to check in on what are your annual goals, what are the personal goals, what are the quarterly goals, things of that nature. And too many times people set those big goals and then there's no mechanism to check back in for it. So making sure that you have some sort of a check-in meeting, whatever the mechanism is, whether it's weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, you know, quarterly, whatever it is, make sure you have some sort of check-in, but then also make sure that you have the notes from the prior meeting, that when people say, I commit to do this by whenever, you can go back through and say to them, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? So that way, if somebody says, I forgot, then you can come back and get it. But then if somebody says, well, I didn't do it because here's what the priority was, then you get to have more of a priorities conversation. So to me, if you don't have a tool like that, you'll have all sorts of aspirations, but you won't actually get the results that you want. And so I think it's from the book, actually, Execution. It says execution is the missing link between aspirations and results. So if you want to have those rocks, you've got to block out the time in order to do it. So I guess before I award a point, anybody want to weigh in on what I just said there about some of those tactics or techniques?
I'll just add.
I think.
Sean first, then Jules, please.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I think that type of like time management, project management, making sure that you are checking in and you're course correcting where you need to be if you're tackling, say, a big rock or a North Star metric, makes a lot of sense. And it also makes sense in understanding when you maybe should stop a project or do a rapid course correction. Making sure that you don't go down a rabbit hole that isn't productive towards what you're trying to achieve. And that's something that actually I've experienced myself, where we look and we've done a lot of work and then it doesn't make sense anymore. Things have changed in the market and we actually have to stop that project. We take the learnings, we document it, and then we move on. So
yeah, to quote my basketball coach, a lot of activity with no productivity, right? That's how unfortunately he described most of my career. Jules, what would be your take on this topic? You get the last word before we start.
Actionable items, starting off meetings with those actionable items that were at the end of your last meeting is probably one of the best ways that we hold each other accountable when we walk out of, especially, you know, those marathon meetings that are so long, and you're trying to remember even what at the beginning of the meeting you discussed and what you're responsible for. So reflecting back, first off, walking out of the meeting with the list very clearly defined of actionable items, but then also reflecting back on them at the beginning of the next one, giving feedback of what Sean was mentioning, giving feedback of where you are, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, or just that we're on the right track and that the end result is going to be what we actually need across the team and not just one person's vision.
Great, wonderful. Again, super answers for both of you. A lot of good nuggets to take away from there. I'm going to give Sean the point on this one, because I think he had where he started off in saying, always asking the question, is this high impact? Not just is it on my schedule, right? Is it something that's on my to-do list, but is it high impact? And then those rocks are really something that are helpful as well to distinguish those important tasks from your other ones. So, all right, so this is going to be our halftime break, an opportunity for Jules and Sean to make halftime adjustments, and an opportunity for our listeners to pause and let you know that we'll take an opportunity here to thank our sponsors who support the RSPA community and make this podcast and video series possible. Our platinum sponsors are Blue Star and Shift4 Payments. Our gold sponsors are Heartland and ScanSource. Also want to let our listeners and viewers know an RSPA membership has never been more valuable or more affordable. Annual sponsorships of VARs start at just $250, that's US, Sean, for a year. That's covers an entire year and dozens of high-value services, including access to a legal advisor, security advisor, VAR and ISE business advisor, e-learning programs through the RSPA Academy, discounts on business services, and a college scholarship program for the families of RSPA members. Vendors and software developers benefit from an RSPA membership as well through introductions to VAR and ISV members and by showcasing their solutions through the exclusive RSPA Solutions Center. Accelerate your success by joining the RSPA today. To receive the benefits of an RSPA membership or RSPA sponsorship, email membership@gorspa.org. Finally, don't forget to save the date for Retail Now 2021. That's July 25th through 27th in Nashville. Retail Now is where the industry meets. And before we hit record, the three of us were talking about how excited we are to be able to attend Retail Now that's on track to take place in person. You know, we always come up with a tagline for the event this year, and it's almost like now featuring people in 3D, right? Because we've just been used to seeing everybody right on flat screens. So all right, good. So that's an opportunity for you to pause, refresh yourself. So let's jump in. Jules, hope you can answer this question first. And I'm going to introduce this question by first stating that the word obviating is a funny word and an important principle. It's OBVIATE, obviate. So that means to anticipate a problem prior to it occurring, and then taking action to prevent it from happening. So the simplest example is you get up in the morning, you look out the window, you see that there are dark clouds, and you say, I'm going to grab an umbrella or a jacket so I don't get wet. That is obviating. But now, how does that fit in with accountability? So to hold yourself and others accountable, you have to obviate, because you'll achieve your results way faster if you anticipate and prevent the most likely roadblocks to that success. So Jules, starting with you first, what's your take on obviating? And feel free to share your thoughts and add any examples about obviating.
Obviating is my jam because I'm an overthinker, as I mentioned earlier, like probably too much, but anticipating where the problems will come from. Again, one of the 5 big tenets about accountability is the last one is, can the accountability measure be gamed? Can it be cheated? Where are the fail points of it? And so when I start to look at things, I look at every single corner of it. And I think that having somebody in your organization who does that, who looks at the small pictures, of course, you need somebody who looks at your big pictures, and somebody who looks at those smaller pieces, those smaller pictures, but who's also risk averse. I think that's a big part of it. And I think a lot of small business entrepreneurs, both our clients and the other folks in the channel, are probably entrepreneur types that are less risk averse than I am personally. And I think that risk aversion is where obviating comes into place. Or what are the things that can go wrong? What are the resources that are finite that we could exhaust? What are the consequences of failure? What are the consequences of success? And making sure as you move forward in that you're keeping those in your mind's eye, so that decisions revolve around that granular and big picture.
Great. And yeah, just so folks aren't confused, obviating doesn't mean that you're some super negative person. Everything's going to go bad. It's going to be terrible. But at the same point, it's not like optimistic, like I'm sure everything's going to work out if we just try our best, that kind of thing. So I like how you stated that, Jules. Sean, what's your take on obviating and what Jules said?
Yeah, absolutely love it. I think it's one of the best things you can practice as a team, especially from a planning and like a strategic perspective. So we do it all the time when we're looking at projects, or when we're looking at potential partnerships, or even just observing what's happening in the market relative to us. We joke that, okay, it's time to play chess, not checkers with this one. So we look at it because it's not so straightforward. So we have to obviate to understand how different scenarios might play out. And it's actually an exercise I love to do. And it's not because I'm pessimistic, but it is because I'm curious. So I'm looking to try and understand where things might go wrong more often than where they might go right. But if you have a practice like this, and say you're coming up against a new, like, business development, new partnership type of meeting, and you hope there's an ideal outcome to it, but you plan for what a non-ideal response might be and how you can react to that. That meeting, when you do that, that meeting goes a lot smoother, and it has better outcomes than when you might like wing it if I go there. So I honestly, it's something we practice, and I think it's a very important thing to do as a team. From an accountability.
Yeah, I want to follow up on something you said, Sean, and then Jules. So first, Sean, you mentioned about obviating with partnerships. Can you, without divulging any names or company secrets, like how do you obviate on a partnership? Because that could go a zillion different directions.
Yeah, so if we're ideating on why, like the why behind the partnership, so what is for me, it's what is the unique thing from a merchant's perspective that this partnership's going to provide for them. So whether it's a technology partnership where there's a joint solution at play, if it's a partnership with one of our agency partners from a channel perspective, it's what is unique for that merchant. And we might have an idea of what that is, but does the partner have the same idea? So when we come to the table, if they see something that's totally disaligned with our values, with our approach, our mission, or it might be aligned with that, but the actual solution is completely different than we ideated it, and it's not necessarily a good fit, what they're bringing to the table, then where do we take the meeting from there? And how do we make sure that there might be a positive outcome? Because maybe there's a third path that we didn't see. But if we're saying, okay, this is the ideal outcome, this is maybe a bad outcome, and how do we circle that back into a constructive conversation? And that happens not a lot, but it does happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, don't walk in assuming, like, I'm sure there's going to be perfect alignment between our two organizations and our cultures. You have to obviate and say, what questions do we need to ask? What documents do we need? What things do we need to understand and get out on the table to ensure that it actually is aligned, or it's not aligned? And if it's not, then we can talk about where it might not be a fit and go from there. So thank you for that. And then Jules, you had mentioned about you want to make sure that the system is being gamed or cheated. Again, without naming names, but like, what are examples at resellers that you run into where somebody might try to game a system when you're planning it out?
So, I mean, the point of a lot of point of sale systems is purely that it provides the ability for a restaurant or retail store to secure themselves from somebody stealing. And so the way that we program things, the way that we even implement them, basic, network security, that all goes towards meeting that goal of security. And as we have moved into the SaaS world of selling, it's been interesting to watch our resellers then try a little bit to game our system of, okay, if it's really a subscription product, I can hold off until the absolute last minute to paying this either monthly fee or even paying the fee outside of the mechanisms for payment, being part of their credit card processing. And we find that, understanding that they're trying to do cost savings, right? We find that they have little mechanisms, little ways that they want to save those extra pennies and dollars from even us. And so we have to think about, what are we not showing them in value that makes this worth it to them? And so every single time we implement a system, we want to know, what are your goals with the system? What were you not happy with in your previous system? Or if it's a new client, what do you need out of your system that's most important to you? If we can show those values and we can predict what they will absolutely need, then they will find us to be that partner that they really want to work with, and we won't have to worry so much about how could they game it, or are they gaming it.
Got it. Wonderful. Super examples. Jules, I'm going to give you the point on this. Let me give you the point before I forget, and I'll tell you why. Again, both of you made outstanding points here. But one, just the core question of what could possibly go wrong. Right, like that is the core question about obviating. Whenever you're planning down a path, before everybody leaves the room, you need to ask yourself that question. Also, you mentioned about the entire point of sale industry is based on obviating. And so I grabbed the book off my shelf, and for those who are watching on YouTube, it's called, not exactly a 19 or a 2021 title, Wherever Men Trade, right? Couldn't be less gender helpful. But it's called, the subtitle is The Romance of the Cash Register. Right. And so what this book talks about is and you're thinking, wow, romantic cash registers. The reason why a cash register came to exist was the shop owner wanted to leave the shop, and they obviated that if I just leave all the cash lying here in a box, it's going to get stolen from me. So I need something to be able to track it. And so the root of the point of sale system is in obviating. So again, Jules, because you said what could possibly go wrong, and you motivated me to grab The Romance of the Cash Register off my bookshelf, you get a point for that. I've been quoting basketball coaches. I'll quote my wife's obstetrician for this to wrap up obviating. You're thinking, where's this going to go? But she said during when my wife was sharing with her daughter, my wife was concerned and nervous about things, and so some people would say, don't worry, and her OB said, a little neurosis never killed anybody. So that's what I say to everybody in the business world as well. A little neurosis never killed anybody. There's nothing wrong with taking time to obviate and not just assuming everything's going to go great. All right, we're heading into the fourth quarter. Let's see if Sean can make the comeback here. He's going to start off with the first response. I know I overemphasize the competitive nature of it, but I probably got to get back into coaching. So the last point on accountability, and to me, it's a big one. So the importance of conducting a failure analysis, right? We all make mistakes, right? The three of us, everybody listening to this, we all make mistakes, but we don't all learn from our mistakes. And learnings come from conducting a thorough, honest, and candid failure analysis. And so you have to figure out, number one, what happened, and then number two, how can I ensure that it won't happen again? So Sean, tell me your thoughts on achieving accountability by conducting a candid failure analysis.
Yeah, when I hear the question, I think, can you imagine undertaking a project, failing, and then like letting history repeat itself? And so for me, it's like, it doesn't sound like a good business practice. It doesn't sound like good practice at all. And when I think failure analysis, I also think additional work. And if it's coming off the back of a failure, it's something that to retro that project or that work, it's probably uncomfortable. So it might not be something that you're like overly motivated to do, but the benefits far outweigh the additional work and maybe the lack of motivation to look back at the failure. From uncovering accountability, we talked earlier about why accountability is important. So like just running through the practice of that accountability practice and the benefits that come on the back of that, that's one thing. But the other thing is that you don't let history repeat itself. By looking at that failure analysis, you learn from what went wrong, and then you know where to course correct in the future. And that's not just beneficial to you, but it might be beneficial to the team that you're training up underneath of you, or to people that might be in your role in the future. So say you move on into another role in the organization, is it fair to have an experience like that and then not document it and have it shared for the next leader in that position? Or even outside of your team in the organization, perhaps somebody is working on something similar and it can help speed them up if they understood where they should turn right when they were really looking to turn left or something along those lines. So it just sounds, failure analysis is just like good business practice in general, even if it's additional work that is uncomfortable to do. For those reasons, that's why I think it's important.
Great, thank you. Jules, your take on failure analysis.
I guess mine is based on kind of an ROI perspective of it is far more expensive to onboard a new employee, to onboard a new client, to do anything new than to try and keep what you currently have. And so if we're keeping what we currently have healthy, if we're critiquing it and looking at it very, very carefully along the way, we can most likely save clients money, and then save ourselves money. And those little bits of money and time and resources really add up. It's one of those things they talk about, okay, throwing spaghetti against the walls to see what sticks. Well, it starts to, some of it falls down and you can re-throw it against the wall after you've cooked it a bit longer, but eventually you run out of spaghetti. And so when we talk about looking at our failures, we don't want to just, what Sean said, keep repeating history and keep doing the same things over and over. I think that's Einstein's theory of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over. Is that what it is? Okay, great. And so we need to do that. And it's the other parts of failures are, where are the ways that we need to protect ourselves going forward, not just from additional failures, but from wearing ourselves down from failing. Like we need to balance it with some success. And so what can we do to turn this around a little bit so we aren't so heartbroken if something doesn't work out properly, and turning our failures into successes by turning them into learning lessons is definitely a big morale booster that we go through if we lose a client or we lose an employee.
Right, and folks need to get comfortable with the concept of failure in the business world, right? You're not going to go 100 for 100 or 1,000 for 1,000 and then just accept it as part of the improvement process. Like the story that I wanted to share with you and our listeners was, so back in the day, Business Solutions was a magazine and a website. We decided to launch an events division. And so I was the point person for that and had to launch our first ever event in Philadelphia. I went and did all the research and actually reached out to the RSPA and got their checklist and tried to cover as much as I could, but just kind of knew going in, there are going to be things that we did the event that afterwards that we were like, oh yeah, like don't do that thing again. And the one that I specifically remember, we had at the National Constitution Center in Philly, great venue. We set up, the breakfast, where we had a light breakfast and coffee and all that, and then this gorgeous theater where the presentations were going to take place. All right, and so you think this is perfect. Well, everybody, hey, we're time to go in the theater. Everybody starts taking their coffee, and the people at the Constitution Center like, yeah, you can't take food or beverages into the theater. And I remember everybody looking at me like, how did you not know that? And I'm like, okay, this is something I'm going to write down. Like I just assumed that you could, but we've talked from accountability standpoint. So, but what we did was, I wrote it down. We had a system after every single one of our events where we sent out a survey to all our attendees to get their feedback. Somebody was responsible for compiling that, distributing to the team. We then got together as a team. Everybody at the event was responsible for taking notes to say what went well, what could we be doing better? And of course, everybody had at the top of their list, like, you got to be able to take coffee and for the education sessions. I'm like, I know, like completely my fault. And so we never did it again, but in part because then we implemented into a checklist that said, check to make sure you're able to do these things. And after every single event, we had that repeatable process. By the time we got 6 or 7 events in, the feedback we were getting was stellar. The time it took us to produce the events was way, way less. And people would say, you guys are experts at this. Like, who did you learn from? And we're like, well, our mistakes, and just coming up with this methodical system there. So, but you've got to first become comfortable with failures, where you can't say failure is a bad thing, or everybody like, no, I thought everybody did great, everything's wonderful, sitting around that meeting. That is not helpful at all. So I guess either one of you want to weigh in on, I guess, that whole concept of getting your team comfortable with failure.
I think if you are comfortable with failure, and actually, I guess I wouldn't agree that you should be comfortable with it. You should be accepting of it, but not necessarily comfortable with it. I think the biggest part of accepting failure is also knowing that there's something else to try. And I think as leaders, that's probably the most important thing that I can bring to my team is we see this isn't working, but don't worry, we have other things that we can try, or even soliciting, what else should we try? What else, what other ideas do we have? And I think that's the biggest way to get them accepting of failure. But the other piece of it just being, I guess, understanding not necessarily why the failure happened, but what were our reactions along the way? Was it to dismiss it? Could we have prevented it earlier on? Could we have pivoted earlier on? And if we are not trying to cover up those failures and we're recognizing them in the moment they happen or quickly after they happen, we can pivot much faster and save ourselves or our clients a lot of pain.
Yeah, should we have obviated this? And I like your clarification.
Yes.
Get comfortable with talking about failures, right? And that if somebody fails at something, they're not going to get fired, right? They can admit the
Right.
failure, and so you can improve. Sean, any last words on this before I award the points? See if you can send this in overtime.
Yeah. So either accepting or being comfortable with failure. I think one thing that I keep in my mind is that I have yet to see or experience anything that is working 100% of the time. So failure seems inevitable at some point in time, whether it's small or large, or whatever it is in that range. And so being able to accept that and then plan for that perhaps as a team makes you stronger, because you can pivot to iterate on what can fix the failure, how to improve the failure, if you're willing to not let the failure crush you and essentially like take the team off the rails. So I think that's one point that is important, is just to understand that it is inevitable. It will happen. It might be really small. It might be big. But if you're able to accept that and then learn to iterate on top of it, then you're set up for success moving forward.
Fantastic. And you mentioned 1 point. And speaking of 1 point, I'm going to give you the point for this fourth quarter. And part of the reason I'm doing it, and I think, Jules, you quoted Sean on it, was it's inexcusable to repeat an error, right? One of my favorite quotes is, expect the unexpected, not the self-inflicted, right? If something happened before, it's first time, shame on them. But if you're ready for it, then if it happens again, it is certainly second time, shame on me. So, all right. So again, we don't do ties here on Battle of the Channel Stars. So we're going into overtime. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a great accountability quote with you, and you have to guess from 4 options who said it. And so, Jules, since you scored the first point, you get to answer first. And again, Sean, you need to provide a different answer, else we could just be here all night if you're copying. All right, so here's the quote. All right, then I'll give you the 4 choices. The proactive approach to a mistake is to acknowledge it instantly, correct it, and learn from it. This literally turns failure into a success. Was that said by A, Ryan Holiday, B, Stephen Covey, C, Jim Rohn, or D, RSPA HO Whistler Award winner Mark Olson? Again, the quote: the proactive approach to a mistake is to acknowledge it instantly, correct it, and learn from it. This literally turns failure into a success. Jules, what is your answer?
I'm going to go with Mark. I'll give him some credit.
All right, Jules is saying Mark Olson. So, Sean, who are you going to go with? Ryan Holiday, Stephen Covey, or Jim Rohn?
I'll go with A. I will go on the other end of the spectrum there. So.
All right. The correct answer was B, Stephen Covey. All right, we move into double overtime.
Oh, no.
All right, so this quote is, and Sean, you get to go first on this. We must all suffer from one of 2 pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. The difference is discipline weighs ounces while regret weighs tons. Was that Ryan Holiday, Stephen Covey, Jim Rohn, or former RSP board member and Hall of Famer BJ Maynard? Again, the quote: we must all suffer from one of 2 pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. The difference is discipline weighs ounces while regret weighs tons. Was it Holiday, Covey, Rohn, or Maynard? Sean?
I am going to go with Holiday this time.
Going with Ryan Holiday. Jules,
yeah.
So you have to go with either Covey, Rohn, or Maynard.
I'm going to go with Roan just because you did not say that in a Southern accent for that to have been BJ. I know BJ. That was not nearly Southern enough to be him.
Yeah,
So I'm going to go with Roan.
It'd be more gentlemanly and it'd have some yells in it.
Oh,
It was
yes.
not BJ. Jules, you're correct. It was Jim Roan. So, Jules, congratulations. In double overtime, you win this episode of Battle of the Channel Stars. Sean, your reaction first to being the silver medalist before we let Jules have the last word.
Oh, I feel honored to lose to Jules today because she kicked butt at her answers, and I actually learned a lot. And so I appreciate being here and the RSPA for facilitating this, and yourself, Jim. And I do like on the scoreboard how I was blue, and then Team USA was red. It did an inverse of the color scheme there. It's something I picked up on the high-tech scoreboard, and I look forward to hopefully coming back and battling again. So,
you know, if I was better at obviating, I would have thought that all the way through before I printed it up. And I have to say, you're much more magnanimous than the silver medalist of our first Battle of Channel Stars, whose first reaction was, "I demand a recount." So I really appreciate that. Jules, your final words on today's session.
I love that I'm able to write down some, even standing here being the person to speak and give my thoughts. I love being able to write down all of the suggestions I hear from both of you, and even things that pop up into my own head. So I thank you for the opportunity, and USA. I mean, I'm just, I don't.
But you know what? It's an honor to have USA chanted in your honor. So maybe we'll dub in some of the USA chants. I was going to say back from the 1980 Olympics when the USA beat the Russians, but you guys weren't alive in 1980 to experience that. So, well,
some
fabulous.
Of us
yeah, it was small, but yeah.
So to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed today's discussion and fierce competition. If you did, be sure to subscribe to the RSPA YouTube channel and the Trusted Advisor podcast so you never miss an episode. We'd also appreciate if you'd rate us wherever you find your favorite podcast. My personal philosophy, the more stars, the better. The stars and stripes, the better. If you'd like to learn more best practices for VARs and ISVs in the retail technology industry, check out the RSPA blog. You can find it at gorspa.org and then clicking on RSPA blog. Before we go, big thanks again to Sean Buckley and Jules Curs for sharing their wisdom with us today. That was fantastic stuff. That was a fun competition, and just like both of you said, a lot of good nuggets of wisdom shared there. Thanks also to RSPA Marcom manager Chris Arnold for his production work, Joseph McDade for our music, and last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. Our goal at the RSPA is to accelerate the success of our members in the point-of-sale ecosystem by providing knowledge and connections. For more information, please visit our website at gorspa.org. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, everybody.